Hey, Claire. So
Hey,
wonderful to see
Eduardo.
you, be with you.
It's so good to see you too.
Yeah.
The last
I
time
feel
we
like,
saw each other, it was what was 2 weeks ago, right?
yeah, on Zoom, yes.
On Zoom, a cross-continental musical
Well,
experiment.
I've
And
been, I've been, I've been with you, the roulette live performance you did, when was that? Midweek or something?
yeah, Wednesday
I,
night.
I, I watched that and it felt very live to me. I watched it not live, but I watched it yesterday. Um,
Awesome.
so I feel like it's a very strange and beautiful thing to be kind of following each other around, sometimes reverberated through the Amazon here on the Zoom. But I
Yeah,
think the last time we saw each other live was at Banff. That's probably 2 years ago, right?
that the last time we saw each other in real life.
Yeah,
But yeah,
live
I
and
feel
live.
you're very
Right.
with me too. I mean, I've been carrying this around with me and rereading it, and yeah, you're constantly chirping. I mean, not just on WhatsApp, but I feel
Yeah,
like telepathically you're chirping over my shoulder ideas and
I feel the
encouragements
same
and
way.
things.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
So, first of all, I'm so glad that we could do this, and just grateful to the folks
Me
at
too. Me
Artforum and
too.
Book Forum for making it happen. I thought if you were game, I'd love to just offer a little musical offering before our
Yes,
conversation, or as a way to
yes,
open our conversation.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
so I'm gonna play you a piece that was actually one of the lifelines for me during the pandemic. You know, the early stages of the pandemic when we were all just so desperate to have any kind of music making experience with loved ones
Mm.
that were on the other side of the world. And of course, that seems like 10 years ago now, especially because you and I are constantly making music, cross continentally over
Mm.
Zoom. But, in March of last year, it was just so incredibly awkward and weird and scary. And
Yeah.
one of the lifelines for me was a series of just kind of spontaneous musical postcards that were sent to me by composer friends and collaborators all over the
Mm.
world. They'd
Mm.
write just like one or two lines of music and WhatsApp it to me or screenshot it to me, and I would play it immediately. I drop whatever I was doing, which was usually not much of anything,
Mm.
and play it and record it, send it back to them, and they'd send me a few other ideas, and we'd kind of like exquisite corpse style build a little piece. And this became an addiction for me and for like a lot of my composer friends. And so I'm going to play you one of these. It's by the Chinese composer Du Yun,
Okay.
and it was inspired by a poem by Nikola Mazidov, the Macedonian poet, called "Fast as the Century." And the original postcard was just a couple of lines of music written for contrabass flute, for the instrument that I call Big Bertha,
Bertha. Yes.
which you know well. Since I'm my own sound person here in my living room, give me 2 seconds to just switch over this audio system. Okay, here goes. So that's Bertha. Just saying good morning.
Bertha, it's interesting because on the one hand you think of Bertha as so otherworldly because she's so deep in some ways, but it's the flute version. It's sort of like the cello in the sense that, once the instrument acquires the proportions of the human body,
Mm.
then there's a kind of joining that I feel like, I don't know, I'm just thinking about the relationship of the violin to the cello. Like the cello for me is such an organic instrument, it's such an instrument that becomes the player in the way that Bertha does, because it really is your register, because it's so, the size, the matching is so much, it's roughly your size in some ways. And there's a kind of
She's got a few inches on me, but yeah.
in
But you're
height,
absolutely right about
but in volume, I don't know.
the relationship to the cello. I mean, the cello has an end pin, of course, so the pin connects this piece of wood to the ground, to the earth.
Yes.
And this flute has an end pin as well.
Oh wow.
So, and you can actually adjust the end pin, as a very small person. The end pin is it's quite extended on
Yes.
on Bertha, so that I can stabilize it and all of that. But yeah, it is the range of the cello, and it has that earthiness. And interesting with big flutes, and I'm sure that your colleague Manati talks about this too, that with the larger the instrument, of course the larger the aperture, the hole through which you put the air is, and the closer the production of sound is to a simple unadorned exhalation, right? With the flute, which like the violin, it's up here, it's close to the chest and the neck and the heart area. This instrument it makes contact with all those parts of your body too, like the cello, but it connects to the earth, and the size of the cavity that you are hurling air through has so little resistance. I mean, the reason it's so resonant is that it's the size of the tube as well, but the column of air that's going into the instrument it needs to be so relaxed. With the flute, you need a lot more tension. Bertha doesn't want tension. She just wants like open soul. With the membrane between playing the large flutes and simply exhaling or speaking or singing a tone, that membrane is very thin. And of course it is on the flute in general, because we don't have a reed, we don't have that thing that resists in between the column of air and the axe, right? So that's already the case with the flute, but with the larger flutes, it's like more and more of those barriers are taken away. So you're closer to, I believe you're just closer to the soul. You're closer to that most open, most vulnerable center
Anima.
of you.
Yeah, of course. Breath, life breath, samai in Quechua.
Sama.
Samai.
Samai.
Breath, life breath. I think this is fascinating because, I could hear what you just played. I could hear the way in which breath voicing your breath, your voicing, and then the voicing of Bertha were all so close, and in some ways, interestingly, quite different from the way that, because you often do use voicing in your, when you play. Voicing, I'm using it as a non-technical word. I mean, your own human voicing, not flute voicing. I mean, you play with them back and forth. But interestingly, I found, I'm sure you can do this with Bertha too, but I was really taken yesterday when I was listening to the roulette piece, the piece, the roulette performance, the first piece, Merienda, in which there was a moment towards the very beginning in which you're playing with Susie on drums or percussion and Alex piano at that moment, and there's a percussive theme that the pianist puts forth, which is taken up in a very obviously percussive way by the drums, and then you bodily take it on, They're just pops. You start popping because I see the video. You can just, and then you're at that point playing the flute, and then it becomes reverberated through you in the flute in a slightly different way. But the matching there, like in some ways, I felt like the obvious matching between you and Bertha right now is breath, but the obvious matching between you and flute was percussive, was movement, was this something, I don't know. It's just a kind of an interesting. It was quite interesting.
That's so good. I mean, first of all, thank you for watching that show. It's this is my first in-person live show for live audience indoors that I've played in a year and a half, and we actually walked on stage on Wednesday night, and we were so emotional. Yeah, and we were like, I mean, I knew this would feel, heavy and big and exciting, but I wasn't prepared for this. Just like we all just kind of wanted to cry when we got on stage. We saw these people, and the intensity of listening that was palpable in the space even before we'd played a note. We just walked out on stage. It was really, really special. And I haven't listened back to the whole show yet, so it's really cool to hear you describe that moment. I think I know when that moment was. It was very early in the program, right? Maybe in the first 4 or 5 minutes or something.
Minute 11:36 on the entire thing, but of course it's just a few minutes into the actual piece.
What's so interesting about that, I mean, just hearing your description of it, of course, those are the first moments of the performance, and we're the most nervous. We're the most, you feel kind of out of body in those moments, but you're actually, the nerves bring you, they can bring you even more into your body. And so you're super attuned. And that's an improvised piece. I mean, it's a piece by Susie Ibarra, but it's a chart with little gestures. And we had decided just before we went on stage for the first time to do that without hand signals. The piece has 11 gestures, and typically Susie, the composer of the piece and also the percussionist, will hold up, number 6, and then take an instrument out and sort of like live mixing, then say, okay, no, you're at 11, and then this is the signal for actually just go ahead and play whatever, and then you're taken out. But we just decided right before we went on, we were like, no, let's just see if we can do the hand signals telepathically. And let's see what happens. And those moments, I mean, this happens so often, especially with improvised music. The moments that feel the most uncomfortable, they feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I am terrified. Those sometimes end up being the most interesting, the most honest musical moments of the performance. And I remember being super freaked out in those first 3 minutes. So I'm really glad that your description makes it sound like we were doing something interesting.
Well, I mean, going back to how is my I part of a larger we. I think that's what you were discovering. What I found fascinating about that moment, there was just a moment in which there was this rhythmic theme passing through, and then you took it on. And it wasn't just, you were no longer just keeping rhythm or following a rhythm or just being at the beat. It was transformed through you. And I think one of the questions I'm fascinated about that is that what is that space that you uniquely, and I mean, you right now is you, but also you as a placeholder for other yous, other eyes, can uniquely inhabit such that you make a difference. And yet you're not just you anymore doing it. That for me is one of the ongoing mysteries of figuring out how we as selves are in this together.
I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I have many possible responses and of course a lot of questions, but I do come back to something that was said in one of our Zoom sessions, I think early on with Manati. He said, you have to romper el miedo. You have to break the fear. And those words, but also the way that he said those words, just it cut into my bones, and I was like, oh, that's a summons to break the fear. It's not just about going through the fear or not having the fear or using the fear as material or any of these things that we can talk ourselves into as processes that go around and are actually, kind of cheat the the deeper spiritual process of exploding the self. I mean, you want to you want to immolate it. It's there and it's a point of tension and you have to work with it, but you do have to break your own fear, and the only way of doing that is through practice, like repeated practice. I mean, I feel like the process of making music is it's a continual process of undoing the self, because those moments when music is happening to you, the way that dreams happen to you, like music is a form of dreaming.
Yes.
And improvisation, well, all kinds of collective collaborative music making and ensemble formations, I think, are a form of collective dreaming. Improvisation, I think, heightens it because we're in a much more vulnerable state. We don't have a plan, and so we're relying on so many thousands of decisions that are being made simultaneously and in community with one another, even if that means in great conflict with one another's ideas from moment to moment. Right. But that kind of collective dreaming is most powerful, of course, when you feel it happening to you. And it's not that you disappear, it's that you are your body, your instrument, your presence in that moment is a conduit, it's a vessel for all of these past and future selves. And when we can touch that, or when it touches us in a moment, even if it's just one moment, and then we realize in trying to grasp it that it's now out of our reach and we're back into our egoic, self-referential whatever. Those moments, I mean, I live for those moments. And I believe we all have them. As listeners, we have them, and as performers and experiencers of sound, we have them.
But I guess
so that's the aspiration, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but then the other question is, when you become a vessel for this larger thing, in what way does your vessel shape the larger thing, the larger we? And I think that's also an interesting point, because I don't know. I mean, this is one of the things that I've been struggling with often through my attempts to reflect on Manadi's question. It is really that. So, do you just abandon yourself to the flow of that which is passing through you, in which case, why do, in a non-egotistical matter, why do you or me matter? And maybe mattering beings has to do something with finding the right way to give that shape by always, by having your own shape constantly being able to break. So maybe the question is breaking fear, but also allowing fear to break you.
And being in mutuality with your environment, which includes all of your fears, right? I mean, being in alignment and in reciprocity with whatever and whomever is in your field of I mean, for me, I'm thinking of this in terms of music making, but I imagine there are all kinds of parallels with the ethnographic work that you're doing. And I think about I think about something that has always really inspired me about your work, and also the way that you talk about your work, is this insistence on play as this very serious pursuit.
Yes.
And even and perhaps especially during times of great crisis and confrontation of fear. And that can seem, I mean, this is a delicate thing, right? Because it can seem, if we're not specific about this, and if we're not really serious about this can seem like a really frivolous response to the sixth extinction, for example, or to the world being on fire, literally on man-made fire, which it is at this moment. But your insistence on play as the most serious response, because all we need to do is look at the institutional responses, right? What's the first thing that institutions do in times of crisis? Well, they shut down places of play and experimentation and risk-taking. and they make their institutions smaller, and they make their visions and their programs smaller. So, I mean, as artists and anthropologists, I mean, I think we have to work actively against those trends that we see. And we, of course, we've been seeing that left and right in the pandemic. But I love that this is, as I understand it, connected for you, over this whole journey from How Forests Think to the new book project and your work with Manati and the Sapara Nation and all of that, to an insistence on play as the conduit to, a larger summons, which is to create and nourish and sustain open spaces for people. How do we create open spaces in the midst of crisis? And
absolutely. I think that this is part of what I'm trying to figure out for myself. This insistence on play, and I've actually had to fight for this at the university. Recently, we had a very depressing meeting with someone really in the higher ups of fundraising here, who was just, basically told us that our goal is to get grants funding so that we can in turn get more funding. And
hamster wheel, academic hamster wheel.
Right. And the point is that play is a luxury in some ways, but in other ways, there's a kind of play creates the kind of world that made us. That is, the kind of flourishing you see in the biological world is the product of play. The kind of ways in which a biological dynamic is not just something that is just subject to the forces of selection. No, it's the creation of a sheltered space that creates variation, of which the system is built such that you never know which variants will be useful in the future. And that gets at that whole dynamic, the whole of that, the seriousness, of course, is that there are problems to be solved. There are things that are impinging upon us that we must react to. But if we only react, then there's nothing left but the reaction. And I think that was so beautiful for me about what happened at 11 minutes and 36 on that track, which is you create a space for play. You're completely in the rhythm. You're moving in a bodily way to this percussive force that was moving between Alex and Susie. And then, even though you were afraid, which we couldn't tell, or you were fearful, you created an opening. And your response, your rhythmic response, was not just that, it refracted into this other space of possibility. And then it became something melodic that one was taken up again by Alex on the piano. And that, I think, is one example of the space for play. But the thing that for me that's important is that is not just us playing in the space given to us. And that is life. That is life. And as such, it's in that space, first of all, that we have we need to defend that to the death. It's, your space of play is not just about you. It's about creating, it recognizes that is what it's about. And we can fight when we recognize that those places are being shut down for others. I mean, maybe that is, a definition of oppression. But that is also the place that's what we have to hold on to in the larger world. And it's also the place of possibility, because that's the place where we will find what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So for me, this gets into this larger question, which I've been sort of dying to ask you for a long time. And now I think we have a few minutes, maybe I can start getting at this, is about how you understand, what you understand music or song to be. And I want to maybe an entry to this would be to think about the end pin, Earth's end pin, or the cello's end pin, in the sense that there seems to be a reminder in that the kind of song that's being created there between you and Bertha is also grounded and is somehow related to that grounding. And in some ways, that's in my own work in How Forests Think, one of the refrains of that book is to say that all of those things. I'm an anthropologist, of course. I study what it means to be human. I study human culture, which is usually the way we understand what it means to be human. But throughout all of that, what I've come over the years to understand working in the Amazon is that space for play, the space of language, of culture, has its own liftoff. We can play in our own room, so to speak, our cultural room, but really it is actually grounded, yet we often don't realize it. It is grounded in a much larger communicative world, which is more like dreaming, more like music. And I think for me, one of the challenges is to find those conduits, to become the vessel for the freer traffic between this larger world of vital song, the forms of expressivity, of playful expressivity that is being expressed through this larger sphere of beings of which we are a part, and to then channel it through different kinds of craft, like your own, of real serious play, serious study, into something. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like music or song is some sort of privileged venue to figure this out. And that's, I think, what is so exciting to me about the Witness Project, the work we're doing with Manati and the Sapara Nation. I mean, I know nothing about music, as my grandmother would
yes,
say.
you do. Yes, you do. I love the way you write about music. I love the way you speak about music.
It comes from a position, as my grandmother would say, povero ignorante. I mean, I may know something because I might be able to resonate with something, but I know nothing. I know nothing. Just it's a fact, okay? I know nothing about music. And that was what was so interesting about band for me. Here are all these luminaries of the experimental and contemporary classical world, but I never knew and didn't even know who they were until somebody told me, "Oh, you were with that person, you that person." I don't know. And I know nothing about I know nothing about the repertoire. I know nothing about the language, and yet I knew it all. I was completely, I completely understood it, and I was completely moved by it.
Well, I mean, speaking of mutuality, that was totally the experience of me and the faculty, and I think a lot of the students that I talked to too, that you were able to touch during you were just there for a week, but it was such a rich and deep week. This is a group of musicians who had never taken an anthropology class in their lives. But of course, in the same way that I actually disagree that you don't know anything about music. I think you know a lot about music. I think every listening being understands music on a cellular level, the same way that somebody who's never taken an anthropology class, I mean, of course, is thinking anthropologically. Like, we're human beings. We observe ourselves and others in relationship with one another and with our surroundings. And so, I mean, I think we can, without puffing ourselves up, I mean, I do think we can let go of those I don't know anything about your field kind of things, because I never took an anthropology class in my life, and yet your book speaks to everything that matters to me as a musician. It's a book about music as much as it is a book about people and thinking beyond people, and forests thinking through us, because forests are musical. And maybe in there, I'm not going to posture and pretend that I have an answer to your question about what music is or what song or vital song is, but I have ideas and I have responses. And one of them is, I think, in the idea of the thinking, singing forest, which is that music is fundamentally vibration.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, whether it's the vibration of two tiny lungs and the tiny bone structure of the tiniest bird that makes the most extraordinary song, or whether it is, the biodiverse convergence cacophony of birds with hundreds of thousands of other species in a, 100-foot radius in the midst of the forest making a music together with the sound of the wind in the trees, or whether it is, I mean, just to get like a little bit more conceptual here, but actually I think it's not conceptual. It's about material and the way that we vibrate through things and through our bodies. You know, Alvin Lucier, the composer, is one of my heroes and mentors.
And you just did that. Your album just came out.
Yeah, he just turned 90.
Yes.
I mean, 90 years young. He's just an astonishing human. He said once that every room has a melody that's waiting to be heard. And, you know, you could be like, oh, that's so abstract, that's so conceptual. It's actually not. It's like, no, every room is a resonant space. It's made up of material, stone, plaster, wood, metals. And that particular unique space that is an instrument, it's a chamber, has a sound, it has a vibration, it actually has a pitch. It has its own vital song. So if that isn't an argument for everything being animate when we are witnessing it and listening to it and attuning to its vibration, if that isn't music, I don't know what is. And I mean, as a flute player, of course, you know, I was trained classically, trained with the Western traditional canon, you know, and really drank that Kool-Aid for my youth. Like, that is the music, that is the most important music, and it's the reference point for all other musics and all other cultures. I mean, just a total hogwash, right? Until I became, you know, gradually and then very dramatically disillusioned with the idea that the music, this tiny fraction of music history that I knew and that I loved because it was the only thing I was exposed to, was in any way central. And, you know, one of the big discoveries for me as a teenager was, oh my God, no, the history of the flute, it's not this metal instrument. The flute is the oldest musical instrument. I mean, you know, the flute that is made of bare bone that dates back 43,000 years. You know, thinking about the earliest human beings resonating, vibrating in training through an object that they put their breath through. You know, and it didn't have keys. You know, the original, well, not the original one, because of course we only have evidence of the one that's 43,000 years old, which is, you know, we just have our imaginations, and hopefully in our lifetime they'll discover more. But I mean, that really was a turning point for me as a very young person in understanding that I was part of a tradition that was so much more vast, so much more biodiverse, and that had really very little to do with the tiny sliver of music that I'd held dear and held central for so long. And I mean, this is one of the things I wanted to pick your brain about too, with respect to your new project, but I know this is a big question, so feel free to just, you know, take whatever part of it is interesting. But I find the way that you are writing about the new book, I haven't read the new book, but I've read excerpts of it and I've read your proposal for it, which is, I think, the most beautiful 3-page book proposal I've ever read. There's just so much in that short piece of writing. It's like, it is a piece of music. It's a score already. But the journey, I imagine that as a young person discovering anthropology and becoming passionate about the field, you also had a process of disillusionment with you wrote the book that was controversial and said, no, we need to think beyond human as anthropologists, and that the term itself is problematic. But one of the things that strikes me about this, as I understand it, the next part of your journey, going from, you know, thinking beyond from anthropology to thinking beyond the anthropological to thinking beyond that, beyond into the spiritual realm, is that the disillusionment that you've maybe is too strong a word, but the maybe it's the romper el miedo, you know, like the breaking of your previous fears through just being willing to get rid of the assumptions that are actually foundational for the work that you've already done, and just say, no, this was the prologue. Actually, that book was the prologue to what's coming next.
Right.
Which is a completely different kind of listening and witnessing and understanding the interconnectedness of all beings. Yeah. And I'm just curious about your personal journey through that, and just where you are in this moment, looking outwards towards writing the book, and just like, where are you in that process?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, one thing that's you know, that whole prologue of spending many years in the Amazon, that's something I can't do so easily now. I've got, you know, I've got a job, I've got little kids and stuff like that. It's hard for me to do that. That whole process was in some ways quite traditional. You know, I was doing lone anthropological field work for the lone reason of producing scholarly texts of no value for the people around me immediately, other than just my presence as, you know, an individual. And yet that was what opened the door to actually being able to participate in the way that I do now, because I understand things in both worlds in a way that others may not be able to. And that's why people like Manadi and other folks like in the Sarayaku, people from Sarayaku, come to me because of this kind of, in some ways, I guess you could say playful, like useless thing that I was doing of just immersing myself. And so that's one piece of it. The other one is a constant play, you know, in my explorations about how do I relate to that material, which I still is quite dear to me. I haven't, so this whole question of how do you find in your eye the we that we might become, partially it's a process of, you know, abandoning things that make you stuck as an eye, but also finding the continuities that are there. And it's fascinating in one of the things that has become part of this new project, which is methodologically very playful, of course. I mean, there's music, as you know, because, you know, you're part of this project too. There's, you know, there's visual expression. I've taken to drawing sometimes. And there are the methods used and developed by people like Manadi, which include taking the psychedelic ayahuasca, which was, even though it's central to Amazonian culture, it's not something I got involved in until now. It wasn't something I was personally part of. I was there when it was happening, but I wasn't there in it in that way. And it's interesting, my first vision, my first ayahuasca vision when I first took ayahuasca, which is well after writing How Forests Think, which is, you know, a book about this larger, more organic whole of which we are a part. The first vision I had with ayahuasca was the entire universe actually being a giant shopping mall lit by neon lights. Whoa. And made exclusively of plastic Lego blocks that also made me. It was like a giant cosmic joke that I was the butt of.
Wow. Talk about confronting your fears.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, I got it really wrong. But, you know, that was just kind of like panic, I guess, or some sort of just, you know, it was a kind of iconoclasm that had to happen, just break things up to then reform in something that is much more organic, that does have a continuity with some of those things that I've been developing for a while, but finds it in different registers.
Wow, that's so cool. I cannot wait for this book, Eduardo. I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm working on it every day. It's interesting because, you know, when I hear you play, when I see you play, I sense an ability to enter into a kind of flow for a prolonged period of time that I know it because I felt it, but I in my own artistic practice, because I actually think of scholarship as a form of art. I'm an artist. We're both, I think the artist and the scientist are both fundamentally involved in the process of poiesis. Mm-hmm. So I see myself as an artist in that sense and a scientist. But yet I have to confess that the moments of just pure poetic play that I see you in. I can taste it for a few minutes a day when I write, but most of the time I'm stuck, you know. And this being stuck for me, I know how I think. I know that the being stuck for me is the place where things happen, because I have to break. I can't just flow for flow's sake. I have to confront whatever I'm stuck with to get to the next piece.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, it's hard. I mean, I think about this because this is my process every day. I get up
Yeah.
early in the morning and I work on this book. But it's not, it's a very difficult form of, it's a very difficult form of poesis, I think, somehow. I
Yeah,
don't know.
well,
I
you know,
mean,
it's if it's any consolation at all, the process of making music is also very, very much about the edges. You know, you feel, I feel it physically. I feel the edges of myself. That's the stuck place, right? Like
yeah.
I blow up against, literally with the flute. Like I blow up against a limitation that is mine. You can say it's the limitation of the instrument, but it's the limitation of the column of air that is coming from this body.
Yeah.
And that's a stuck place. And that's most of the time. Most of the time I am confronting the things that I am unable to do. And that's the work, right? Because, I mean, scientists and artists, like our job is to go beyond what we know. And,
right.
But I'm more and more interested in playing, and specifically playing the flute, this instrument that's played with air, for long periods of time. I mean, and it's a central theme in this Density 2036 project of mine. It's a 24-year project, so it's already a durational piece in that sense.
Right.
But each year I'm building this new body of repertory, which, you know, when I started the project, it was really important to me to talk about it as like I'm building a new canon. And you know, the stuff that was really like that language was really important to me 7 years ago, and I said it's just so unimportant. Like I'm so not interested in building a canon. I'm interested in building in contributing to, not building, but like contributing to and nourishing an ecosystem for a new way of making work and a new way of playing the instrument, a new way of developing and iterating on the instrument. So, you know, the project is a collaboration with composers and sound artists, but it's also a collaboration with integrated technology experts and instrument builders and increasingly artists in other disciplines. But over the course of these 20 years, I'm building in my own practice, I'm trying to cultivate the ability to play for a day and a night. So in the year 2036, when I'll be 58 years old, and you know, if I make it that long, the plan is to play the entirety of the material that has been created in the project in a single sitting, in a single experience for 24 hours. And so each year I'm building, you know, the musculature, but also, you know, it's about a meditative focus that has been really rich. And frankly, during this year that I haven't traveled and that I have mostly been alone in my apartment with my instruments, has really deepened because it's all I've been able to do. And, you know, I mentioned this because the other day when, well, I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, that we met on Zoom with Manati and the youth of the Sapara Nation in the Amazonian rainforest. You were in Montreal, and I was with my trio in New Paltz, and we made music in a trance-like state over Zoom with all the technical failures and everything for 2 hours. It was amazing. That is one of the most powerful musical experiences I've had in a long time. At any moment, I could not distinguish between the sound of a rooster in Ecuador and the electronics that were being manipulated with rooster-like sounds right next to me. If that's not a forest thinking through us over these thousands of miles of interwebs, I don't know what is.
No, it's a very special moment, and I think there's something really taking hold with the youth there. They're getting quite excited about this project, and they're actually, Fabiano was spent some time with them just recently. I mean, that we did the Zoom event, but they were also doing their own work. They and one of them actually has some theater background and was doing movement, and I've been watching some of the clips. It's quite interesting to see the whole thing kind of remixed, Fabiano's remix of it, and then also I also watched, of course I was present, from Montreal, but then I watched the filming you did of you all listening. I could see you actually performing as you were hearing from your own, audio feed what was going on. That was very beautiful too. Um,
It
so,
was, yeah. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And I also have spent a lot of time on the Witness website over the last few days, listening
yes,
to the field recordings that have been made
yes,
um, in the Amazon rainforest, and the ones that are just the sounds of the forest. I think there's one that is in the middle of the night. It's the sound of
yes,
midnight,
yeah.
and it sounds like electronic music. It sounds like early electronic music. It's
Oh,
absolutely astonishing. And I'm curious, I mean, what impressions have been shared? Like, what have the Sapara youth said about this process? I mean, have they told stories or shared impressions of these witnessing, listening experiences with you or with Fabiano?
with Fabiano, we're still working on that material, but it's coming out. He did a whole series of interviews with them, and those are going to be posted on the
Mm.
website. In fact, what the doc, Manati and I, what we offer, part of a lot of our work together is writing documents.
Mm.
So we are the first thing we did together was to create a document called Naku, which is the Sapata word for forest. And we created this through many of the kinds of all sorts of experimental methods. The second document we created is about a sacred area in that forest called Kabungishi. And we went with those youth to that
Mm.
spot and slept there and dreamt there and did all sorts of things, had little kind of workshops in the forest, discuss things. And now came another document. And now we're writing a third document, which is going to be launched actually this coming week on this Wednesday.
Mm.
And that's about education. And it's about how to create Sapara youth who could be leaders, who can in some ways bring forth the vital song, who
Mm.
can be leaders in Pauline Oliveros' sense of, this is what I saw at 1136 with you, um, um, the sense that you can step back in the past to see where we're coming from, and you can see where others are going, but then you can be there in a way that allows others to see what their trajectory is, what
Mm.
it always has been, but only visible thanks to you. That's leadership.
Mm.
And that's what we see as the kind of
It's,
idea of
yeah.
what education could be. And I think Pauline Score says it right there. Um,
That's so beautiful, Eduardo. I mean, on so many levels, and that is a description of what it is to witness,
yes,
and to bring beloved Donna Haraway into the conversation.
yes,
That is our ability to respond, right? We want to be
yes,
capable of a response
right,
that is generative and
yes,
that is also connected to direct action. I mean, this is one of the things that just inspires me and moves me so much about your work and the way that you do it. You have all these endpins that are connected to, the ethnographic, connected to the spiritual, and
yes,
connected to the political in terms of, I mean, as I understand it, one of these documents, the declaration that I read that came out of this, these are political statements. They're
that's right.
direct actions. They're challenges to the local government. They're challenges to laws that are in the
Mhm.
process of being reinterpreted.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
and they have resulted, and I imagine as this grows, will result in direct changes that need to be
Yeah,
made to protect these peoples and to protect their forests, our forests.
yes,
And
yes,
I just I'm so moved by the not just the conceptual, but the like palpable, the just very real interconnectedness of all of these different endpin territories in your work, and the and the willingness to not just go beyond what you did before, but to really
mhm,
understand the limitations of it. I mean, back to our working up against our edges. And that's what makes me just so profoundly excited about the new book project and all the things that it will spawn.
Remember the piece that I played at Banff when I was there?
Oh, I'll never forget it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, this kind of more literally musical exploration began for me and for Manati several years ago. It began through our work together in the community, where one of my first visions through ayahuasca was that my grandmother was an amateur archaeologist whose collection of archaeological pieces that are shamanic pieces from the Ecuadorian coast, we had donated to a museum after she died, to a university museum. And in this vision, it became very clear to me that these were not just pieces; they were animate beings, and they had something to say, and I had to help become the vessel to help them say it. And one of the most exciting moments of that whole project, which is still happening, we're still designing the museum, and we're going to hopefully be building it soon, was that we took Fabiano, the Argentinian Ecuadorian musician Ruben Silva, and Manati and I took 50 sound instruments from that collection to the Amazon and put them again in the forest. And it was just an amazing experience. And what was so interesting, one of the things that was interesting with Ruben Silva, who's a musician who is trained in playing archaeological pieces, among other things, was for him to learn to not make music, not impose any kind of musical structure, and to allow the music to come forth. Such a challenge, and
it's such a challenge. And I mean, this is one of the great ongoing teachings of Pauline Oliveros, right? Is to buck your training. She was always saying in her slightly Texan drawl, she'd say in workshops and rehearsals, Claire, you just gotta buck your training. Just buck that classical training. But one of the ways, yes, but I mean, it's only because of your incredible attunement given to you by a discipline, a practice, a vocation, that you can then bucket. That's serious play, right? It is. And I would say yes, and the seriousness of that vocation, that we have all these harsh words for it, the discipline and the training, but I mean, I really just, it is the play. Let's just call it the play. The practice is kind of a pretentious way of talking about it too. Like, it's the play. But part of the charge of that play for me is the ongoing development of new techniques, right? I mean, I could spend 24 out of 24 hours a day for the rest of my life trying to understand, even have a rudimentary technical understanding of all of the great ancient flute playing traditions of the world, and I wouldn't even get through a fraction of them, right? So I mean, that to me is anything but discouraging. Like, that's so inspiring and so exciting to recognize all of the things that I don't know, and to recognize the severe limitations of the training that I have. But speaking of archaeological instruments, so I have in my possession this tiny whistle, this tiny ocarina, that I believe, I mean, I had this feeling when it was given to me by my poet friend, Laura Mullen, whose crazy uncle collected these instruments. She has no idea how he got them. And he ended up with this little ocarina and gave it to her. And she felt, I shouldn't have this instrument. I can't imagine that it was obtained ethically. I'm going to give it to Claire. And I felt like, what am I, I was afraid of it. I mean, I really felt like I need to take this to someone who knows about this. And in the meantime, I felt that the instrument had a kind of a power that I needed to understand before I played it. And it wasn't until our first sessions with Manati that I remembered that it had been sitting on my shelf in my studio for 6 years. Eduardo, it's been sitting, this little object has been sitting on my shelf for 6 years. And the only thing that the card says is 3000 BC, Ecuador. Yeah. And it has a few other names on it that you didn't recognize, and you've talked to your folks. But what's so interesting is that I felt emboldened to play it for the first time in a performance of The Witness that we did upstate a couple of weeks ago when we were deep in, our morning sessions of doing the piece each morning in a different outdoor location. We played in mines, we played in bird sanctuaries, at a beaver pond, we played in the middle forest.
Yeah, and that video is amazing. I loved that.
Oh, it was so fun. I mean, the mine was, talk about a thinking forest. I mean, the mine was, we were accompanying the sounds of water droplets and this just gorgeous resonance in the mine. But that instrument, I felt, not that I would be so presumptuous as to say I have permission to play it, but I felt that it was time to blow on it, and that this was the appropriate place to bring it to life in that way. I also feel, I mean, we'll continue to talk about this, and I would love to return it to Ecuador, into this museum, and find a meaningful way to do that. But it was just so interesting to me that that it came alive through these conversations and through this relationship with Manari, which I feel privileged to be starting with him through you. And through our dear friend Lisa Lim, who is in many ways, the godmother of this collaboration and of all the conversations and spin-offs from it. I wonder, can I just grab the instrument so I can show it to you? Give me 2 seconds.
So Manabi, Steve Evans and Meggers, those are famous archaeologists of that region. And the slip on it, if you just showed it up, it's got this black. If you hold up the ocarina, see how it's black, right? That's that kind of style of, that texture and style of ceramic making is, there is a culture known as Manteño, which is known for that kind of style. But I've been looking through this collection that has some sound instruments. I've also consulted with other people and there are more people to consult with, but we've never seen anything like it.
Wow.
But of course, these things are made by people, like you'll find, we're used to seeing archaeological pieces that are these beautiful things. You can also find things made by children, or all sorts of things. People are making things in their ways. It was interesting because when I first heard you play that, I couldn't see you. The video wasn't all that solid in the New York side of things. I couldn't see you, but I could hear it. And it was so at home. And I didn't know who was making that. I had no idea who it was because I just thought you were playing the flute. But I heard it then. It was so familiar.
Wow.
And, when Manari first saw the sound instruments, and when we first took them to the Amazon, he said to me, look, these are animate entities. And the thing is that when you play them, you're going to be rousing the spirits, and they're going to be calling them, and they're going to come and they're going to say, why did you call me? I'm here. What do you want? And you have to be prepared to explain to them in ways in which they understand.
And we have to be prepared to listen too.
And to listen, right. To listen and to explain, what you're doing. And I think that exchange that we could have with Manari would be really interesting and exciting and important. But I think it's already happened, in the sense that I think that however you want to, keep beating up on your training, whatever that is. I do think that whatever you've done and whoever's helped you do it, you've cultivated a form of listening and sensitivity that allows you to have recognized when that's right and when and how to do that. And I think you've begun that. I think it's something that totally connects you to this whole project, which is trying to do that in many other dimensions.
I feel in a powerful way that the intersection of this instrument and the intersection of Pauline and Manari, and this, I hadn't even thought about this collection of instruments. I remember you talking about it at Banff, but that this is an ongoing project, and that it's connected to your grandmother too, is so is just so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean that's also part of this. How can the I become part of the we is also part of that. I mean, weirdly, this whole project for me of going into uncharted territories in some ways for me is also part of a way of going back into something that is deeply personal, if not familiar.
Hmm.
I mean, it's familial, but it's also strange. So these kinds of confrontations of these people who make you, who are very other to you. Also, my grandmother is a kind of shaman type figure who she's also the diminutive grandmother that I knew, but also this other
Hmm.
being, and that's all inside you.
On that note, Eduardo, I know we're supposed to be
Yes,
wrapping up. I wonder if we could
yes,
close the
yes,
session
yes,
with this beautiful creature. I'll
yes.
tell you. I'll tell you one thing uh, about this, which is that when I play it, I don't feel like the breath is mine,
Mm.
and the tone lasts easily 3-4 times longer than a tone that I have been able to make on any other instrument. So, I mean, it while it doesn't have an end pin, it has an end pin that is connecting with a center of the earth that is so far beyond what this body is capable of.
It's beautiful.
Um, Eduardo, I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Oh, it's the biggest gift. Thank you. And
And
it
I'm,
is also the beginning of it's a piece of a conversation that is still before us
yeah,
and part of our past as well.
yeah. All right. Well, here's a little closing offering. I
Thank you.
should probably make sure it's not too far from the microphone. I mean, too close to the microphone because it's quite powerful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.